Welcome my friends to today's video where we're going to be learning SvelteKit by building the ultimate landing page. Not only are we going to be using SvelteKit, but we're also going to be using TailwindCSS, and in building this landing page we will learn everything about componentry, state in SvelteKit, global stores, responsive web design, props, styling, and so much more. Here's a quick demo of the project. We have our home landing page, some call to actions, little reviews, functional links. We can click on them and it takes us down to a nice feature display where we've got all the different functions and pain points that our app solves. We've got some user reviews, some interactivity, some frequently asked questions, and at the bottom a conversion section, and finally a neat and tidy little footer. And as you would expect, it looks great on a mobile device too. We can scroll through, everything is nice and responsive. We've got a neat little menu, we can click on the menu sections, come through to them, so on and so forth. This SvelteKit course is totally beginner friendly. However, if you do have a bit of experience with HTML and CSS, that will help. If not, there's a link in the description that will be of use to you. And hopefully by the end of the video, you'll be an absolute SvelteKit pro. You'll be whipping out applications, landing pages, web applications, you name it, on the fly, and you can add it to your resume. Happy days. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons. And without further ado, let's get started. And it is now time to dive into the code. To initialize our excellent project today, we are going to start off inside of the Tailwind documentation to initialize a SvelteKit project. Now this webpage and all other links will be linked in the description down below. And that includes the GitHub repository for this code as well if you want to compare. Anyway, so we're going to open up this site and run this command just here. So inside of our terminal, we're going to be in the directory of our choice. You could do this in a VS Code terminal as well. And we're just going to go npm create svelte at latest. And then we're going to give our app a name. So it's going to be Gym App Landing Page. We're just going to hit yes to install the correct packages. And we're going to be initializing a skeleton project. We're not going to have any type check, and we're going to use ESLinting. And with that all done, we can go ahead and open up a Visual Studio Code window, hit open, and just navigate to the directory and open that up inside of our Visual Studio Code editor. We'll know that we're in the right place if we can see the name of our application just up there. And inside of our SvelteKit application, we would expect to see a source directory, a static directory, and then just a few extra files. The source directory is where all the magic is going to happen. However, before we dive into that, we just have to finish configuring our project, and we can quickly do that by coming back into the documentation. So within our VS Code, we're going to open up a new terminal that should already be in the correct directory. And we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste these commands in verbatim. So that's one done. Now we'll install the next one. Paste that just there. That's going to create a configuration file. Now we're just going to copy this content straight across into our SvelteKit.config.js. Just replace it completely. Keep scrolling. We're going to copy this content into our Tailwind.config file. And finally, we're going to copy some Tailwind directives into a file that we're going to create inside of the source directory, and that's going to be an app.css file, and we can just go ahead and paste those directives in right there. Finally, the last thing to do is to create a plus layout.svelte inside of this route directory. So we're going to create plus layout.svelte and just paste this script tag in here as well as the slot tag. Now, if we quickly take a look at the source directory where, as I said before, this is where the magic happens, we're going to first see a lib directory. We're not really going to be touching that for this tutorial. We have a routes directory, and this is a critical directory. This is how the multi-page application functionality of SvelteKit works. So essentially, you can create subfolders within the routes, and these will correspond to the page routes in your web application. There's some reserved keyword or Svelte file names, namely the plus layout and the plus page. The plus page is the file that will be rendered at a particular folder route. on the page. So just in here, we can see welcome to SvelteKit. This is the content, and the plus layout for the equivalent level, or, it's actually inherited from any parent routes as well. If it doesn't exist at a current route, is going to wrap our entire application. So it acts as a wrapper where the plus page gets rendered via this slot content as if it was a parent tag and the children contents was just within here. Now that might appear a little bit confusing, but we'll see how that works a bit more momentarily. After that, we have our app.css. That's just a standard CSS file, which we had imported into our layout. And finally, we have the app.html, which is the, this is the standard HTML document, and this is where all of our SvelteKit project gets rendered, essentially in this div right here. Now, we're not really going to be working too much in these files, just occasionally and maybe a bit at the beginning, but by majority, it will be in the layout and page files. While we're over here, we're going to create a new folder called components, and this is going to have all of our SvelteKit componentry that we will then render within our page.svelte file. Now that that's all done, we can go ahead and boot up our project by typing in npm run develop or just run dev. That's going to start our project on a local host that we can then open up in our browser, and we have our project right here. If we go ahead and type class text green 400, we would expect that to change the color of the text, as it has indeed, and we can confirm that Tailwind is indeed working within our project. Now, to continue configuring our project, we're first going to come over to Google Fonts. This is once again linked in the description down below, and we're going to be having two fonts for our project, one of which is going to be Open Sans. And so we're just going to scroll down and select pretty much every single font family that, or font weight and style there is. So that's just going to be all the italic and non-italicized fonts, right up to the very boldest of them. And then we're just going to also look up Poppins, which is going to be the font for our headers and stuff. And we're going to do the exact same thing, select all the different versions that they have. Takes a minute or so. And once you've selected them all the way up to the bold ones, then we can select this button in the top right hand corner. And if we scroll down a little bit, you will see a link tag show up just above my head there. We can see that it's the link. And at the bottom, there'll be a copy button. We're going to hit copy and come back over to our document. And in the app.html file, inside of the head tags, which we have just here, these contain the meta information about our document, and we're going to paste in those link tags so that we can see them right there. There's 3 of them. Now, while we're doing that, we're also going to look up the Font Awesome CDN package. It's 6.0 CDN, once again, linked in the description down below. And we're just going to copy the link tag for this top version right here. And we're going to paste it directly underneath the other link tag. This is going to allow us to use their funky icon set, which is going to be absolutely brilliant. And the last thing we're going to do inside of our app.html is add a class to the body. And that's just going to be relative background of white, or a BG of white. We're going to give it a text of slate 800, so just not a little bit lighter than black. And then we're going to set the default text size to small, where on a small screen it's going to increase to a base size. So that's going to be our first breakpoint. We're also going to give it a display of flex, a flex direction of column, so that's a flex col, and finally a min height of screen. Underneath that, we're just going to create a secondary div, and this is going to have a class of inset 0, opacity 5, so it's barely visible, absolute a Z index of -1. We use these square parentheses to enter a custom value. And finally, a BG grid, which is going to be a custom class that we will define momentarily. We can go ahead and save that, and we can see our application hasn't really changed all that much, but it is here for us. After that, what we're going to do is come into the app.css file. Now, throughout the course of the tutorial, we'll add a few custom CSS styles to this. To begin, we're just going to start off selecting the HTML tags, which is the wrapper for the entire document. And we're just going to give it a scroll behavior of smooth for some smooth scrolling. We're going to use the asterisk to select every single element, and we're going to give it a font family of Open Sans and a backup of sans serif. And then finally, after that, we're going to select the H1, H2, and H3 tags, in addition to a custom class that we're going to define called Poppins. And we're just going to give that a font family of Poppins and a backup of sans serif. And two more things to go. We're quickly just going to select the span, give that a font family of Inherit, and also a font weight of Inherit. We'll see why that happens shortly. And the last thing we'll do for the minute is define that background grid style. And that's just going to have a background size of 40 pixels by 40 pixels. And it's going to have a background image that's a linear gradient to the right of gray 1 pixel through to transparent 1 pixel. And so that's going to be the horizontal line. And then after that, we're just going to comma and include a second linear gradient, which is going to say to bottom. Let me see if I can scroll that down a bit. To bottom, so this is going to be the vertical one. And that's also going to be gray 1 pixel and transparent 1 pixel. So if we save that, we can see the light grid background show up in our document, which is pretty nifty. That's going to look super cool. And we can also see that our fonts have changed and updated. With that done, we're going to come over to our layout.svelte file. Now in here, what we're going to do is actually start off by taking a look at how our document is going to be structured. A successful landing page relies on telling a good story to sell a user on a product. And for us, that's going to be in the order of first a header. At the bottom, we'll have a footer. And then we're going to have a hero section, which just looks cash money. We'll have a product description section. After that, we'll have some user reviews so that, you know, now the user has been excited about the product. They've seen what it's about. They've seen that other people like it. And then finally, we're going to have a frequently asked questions because often by that point, people have questions. And lastly, a conversion. So this is going to be the general structure of our page. We can just leave that there for now. With that done, we can come into the components folder and we can actually go ahead and create all these components. So we can start off by creating a header.svelte. We can create the footer.svelte. We can have a hero.svelte. Then we can have a product description. Well, we'll actually just call it product.svelte. Then we can have a reviews.svelte, a FAQs.svelte, and finally, I think the conversion.svelte. So that should be pretty nifty. If we come back over to our Svelte, our plus layout.svelte, the first component we're going to render out is the footer, and that's going to go just underneath the slot. And we can see that we just need to import that component from the appropriate directory. There's also just going to be one last component that we're going to make called the section wrapper.svelte, and this is just going to be a section, so we can actually define the section that has some certain styles, specifically the class of, and this is going to be a dynamic class, so we're going to wrap it in curly parentheses. And this is just going to have a minimum height of the screen, a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a padding X of 4. We're going to add some dynamic styles to that a bit later. After that, we're going to have a div that has a class of flex, flexcol, flex1, so that it occupies as much space as it can, and a maximum width of 1400 pixels, an mx of auto, and a width of full. We can open that up, and then finally we're just going to render out the slot, which, if we recall from earlier, is the child content that gets wrapped between the opening and closing section wrapper tags. What that will allow us to do is come over to all of these primary components, and we can call the section wrapper just like that and have it consistently wrap our different sections so that they're all styled the same. The first one that we're going to style is the hero section, so we can come over to our page and get rid of everything default in there. And we can whip up a main section, which is just going to have a class of flex and flex column. And in here, we can start off with our first component, which is the hero. We can open up the hero component just there and close it. This one can be a self-closing component. And nothing is currently showing up. However, if we come back over to the hero component, we can now see that we have that show up just there. Now, the first thing that we're going to have inside of our hero component is actually the header. The header is going to show up at the top of the page, keeping in mind that we have to import that file or that component. With that imported, we can actually start off styling our header. This one's going to be pretty straightforward for the most part. We're just going to start off with a script tag. And underneath this, we're going to open up a header tag. This is going to have a class of flex, col, relative z index of 20. And within that, we're going to open up a div. This is going to have a class of max width 1400 pixels. That's going to be our maximum width for most of our elements. We'll give it an mx auto, a width of full, a display of flex. The default is flex row, so we don't have to add flex cols in this one. We're going to give it an item center, which is align item center, and justify between. And also we're just going to give it a padding of 4, but a padding Y of 6, so it's a little bit bigger. Inside of this element, we're going to first have an anchor tag. This is going to have an href back home, and this is going to contain an h1 tag that is going to be the name of our application. So in this case, it's going to be Swoly Moly. However, we're also just going to wrap the Moly tag inside of a span, because then we can go ahead and give this a text indigo 400. And on the h1 itself, we can give it a class of font semi-bold. If we open up our page, we can see Swoly Moly comes up in the top left-hand corner, and the Moly is the secondary color, which is just as we would like it. After the anchor tag, we're going to have a button. This button is going to be for our menu icon, which is going to display on a smaller screen. So we can come over to Font Awesome Icons, once again, link in the description down below, and just look up menu. And here we can see we get a 3-bar icon. We can go ahead and copy this code snippet and just paste it right on in the button. If we come back to our page, we can indeed see that show up in this corner, so that is perfect. And we're just going to give this a sneaky class of medium hidden. Otherwise, it's going to be grid and place items center. And this is essentially going to default to the grid display. However, on a medium breakpoint and above, we're going to hide the element, so we can see that just disappears up there. However, should I drop the page size, it's going to show up. Now, we're going to inverse this behavior inside of a nav element. So this is going to only display when the hamburger icon disappears. So this can have a class of hidden by default until we hit that medium breakpoint, and then we can give it a display of flex, item center, a gap of 4, and on a large screen breakpoint, we can give it a gap of 6, so it gets even bigger. Inside of here, we're going to have some anchor tags. This one, the first one can be product. After that, we can have a secondary one that says reviews, and then finally we could have an anchor tag that just says FAQ. And then at the bottom of this, we're going to have a button, and this is going to have a class of special button, which is a class we have yet to define. And in here, we're going to have a paragraph that just says start free today. So there we can see all that show up, which is all well and good. And then if we go on a screen that's too small, it swaps over to the hamburger icon. Now for each of these, I'm going to select all of them at the same time and just give them all the same class. And that's just going to be a duration of 200. And on hover, we're going to say text indigo 400 and give it a cursor of pointer. And we can go ahead and save that. And so now when I hover over these elements, we can see it changes color as you would expect. The other thing I'm just going to do is add an href on each of them. That's just going to make the link functional, and we're going to have it scroll us to a section with the ID of product for the first one. For the second one, it's going to be href pound reviews. And finally, it's going to be href pound FAQs. Inside of our section wrapper component, we're going to apply these IDs dynamically. And we can do that by initializing a script tag and having the section wrapper receive some props. Now the way that we receive props is we say export let and then the name of the prop. So in this case, it's going to be ID. And we can go ahead and just say ID is equal to a dynamic ID, just like that. And additionally, we can come into the component itself and we can therewithin pass in that ID. So this one for the hero is going to have an ID of, actually it's not going to have one, but the product, for example, when we create our section wrapper, just like that, making sure to import it, we can then add the ID of our product. That's going to be passed down and consequently used for that section. Now, as you may remember, inside of our header section, we had a button down the bottom that had a special class. Now, this is a class that we're going to define inside of our app.css file. We're going to do that by saying button, and we're also going to define a class called button. So this is going to select all buttons or anything that we give the class button to. And in here, we're just going to say border radius of 8 pixels. Border is going to be 1 pixel solid transparent. We're going to give it a padding of 0.6 em vertically and 1.2 em horizontally. We'll give it a font size of 1 em, a font weight of 500, a font family of inherit, a background color of white, a cursor pointer, and finally a transition. We're going to set the transition on the border color to 0.2 seconds. Now underneath that, we're going to add a button hover effect, and that's just going to set the border color to a hex code, which is hash 646 CFF. Underneath that, we're going to set a button focus event and a button focus visible. And that's also going to have an outline of 4 pixels, auto dash web kit dash focus dash ring dash color. And so those are just some button styles. And now we can define the special button. This is going to have a border color of hashtag 646 CFF. And we're also going to create another one called special button dark. And that's instead going to have the background be the hex code that we've been using. So that's 646 CFF. And we're instead going to give the color to white. And now if we come back into our application, we can just see that's styled our button up here for us. So that's coming along nicely. But there's just one more thing we have to add in here, and that is a .special button hover event, and that's just going to set the border color to a dark blue or just a regular blue. And so we can just see that show up there. It just gets slightly darker. So with that done, that's our header. We can now come into our application and start styling the rest of our hero section. And to do that, I'm going to replace this ASD stuff with a div that has a class of flex col gap of 10, a flex of 1. We're going to give it an items, center, a justify, center, a padding bottom of 10 until the medium breakpoint where we're going to give a padding bottom of 14. That's just going to center absolutely everything. And in here, we're going to have an h2 tag. This is going to have a class of text 5 extra large until we get to the small breakpoint. Then it's going to be text 6 XL medium, text 7 XL. I'm sure you're starting to get the idea. Finally, a large of text 8 extra large. We're also going to give it a max width of 1200 pixels, an MX of auto, and a width of full. And lastly, a text of center. Inside of here, we're going to have a span that has a class of text indigo 400. That's just going to contain the first word, which is gym. After that, we can carry on the sentence that just says training. Then we're going to have a secondary span. This one's going to have a class of text slate 600, so it's going to be lighter than normal. And we're also going to give it a class of line through so that it looks like it's being crossed out. And this is going to say is hard. And then after that, we can have a breakpoint and we can finish off and continue saying just got, and then finally have that span again that's a text indigo 400 and easier. So with that all done, we can see we get this styling just here. One thing I forgot on the H2 element is to give it a font of semi-bold. Now the line through didn't show up, and that's because I spelt it incorrectly, through. And now we can see gym training is hard, just got easier. It's a pretty nifty little sentence because it shows what we do and it shows the common sentiment. Underneath that, we can have a paragraph. This is going to have a class of text extra large, small text 2XL, medium text 3XL, likewise with the one above, a text center, and a maximum width that's slightly shy of the above one, 1000 pixels, an MX auto, and a width of full. Inside here, we're just going to say less thinking and more doing. We're the trainer in your pocket full of, and then we're going to have a span. This is going to have a class of italic. And then we're going to have personalized workouts, exercise explanations, analytics. And then after the span, we're going to finish the sentence that says, and much, much more, full stop. We can see that show up just there. That is all well and good. And then under that, we're going to have a call to action button that's going to be a component that we can create. So that's going to be ctas.svelte. And with that created, we can go ahead and render that just here, CTAs, just like that. Obviously nothing shows up because it doesn't yet exist. But if we come into the component, it's pretty straightforward. And we're going to have a script tag that we're going to modify a bit later. It's going to have some dynamic styling. But for now, we're just going to have a div that has a class of flex, items, center, and a gap of 4. And inside of here, we're going to have our button. This is going to have a class. Once again, it's dynamic, so we wrap it in the curly parentheses, and that's going to be special button. We'll add more to that later. Inside of here, we're going to have a paragraph that just says contact us. And this is going to have a class of text base, small text, large, medium text, extra large. And then we can go ahead and duplicate this button, except the second one is going to be special button dark, which is the darker button we defined. And this is just going to say get started. And then we're going to have the HTML right arrow, which is an ampersand, and then rar. And that's going to give us our two little buttons just here, which is pretty nifty. Now for the last part of the section, we've got the review part. So that's just going to be a div with a class of flex, item center, justify center, a gap of 2, and a text size of base. In here, we're going to have a paragraph that says 4.6. This is just going to be the example rating. Underneath that, we're going to have a some mapping. We're going to map out some content. And we do that in SvelteKit by using the curly parentheses and then using an each loop, essentially. So it's for each item in an array. In here, we have to pass in an array. So we're just going to create one on the fly. It's got 5 elements, and we're just going to call each or refer to each element as index as it gets rendered. And in here, we're going to have a repeated unit. So this is going to be a div that gets repeated for each element in the array. And this is going to have a class of grid, place, items, center, and relative. And in here, we're going to have a font awesome icon. This is going to have a class of FA solid, FA star, and an opacity of 0. We'll see why in just a second. And then after that icon, we're going to have a div. This is going to be a pretty clever div. So it's going to have a class. It's a dynamic class. So we use the curly parentheses to wrap our string. And in here, we're going to give it a position of absolute, a top of 0, a left of 0, a display of grid, and place items center. And then we're going to have a space at the end of the string and then use the plus to append a conditional style. So we're going to say if the index is equal to 4, i.e. it's the last element in the array, then we are going to have the ternary operator or the question mark. And if the index equals 4 evaluates to true, we're going to say width of 60%. And an overflow of hidden. And if it is not true, so we separate the true and the not true statements using the semicolon, we're just going to have an empty string. So if we go ahead and save that, that's not showing up for us. And that's because I haven't put anything within this div because I'm a muppet. So inside of the div, we're just going to have the icon. This is going to be the class of FA solid, FA star as above, and we're just going to give this one a text of amber 400. So now if we go ahead and save that, we can see we get these stars showing up. That looks excellent. And you can see, well, actually you can't see. Let me just move this over. It cuts off that last star at 60%, which is the 4.6. So that's why we did all of that. And then after that div, we're just going to, after the each, we're going to have a paragraph that just says 500 plus. So that's just going to imply that over 500 people have rated the application 4.6 on average. And yeah, that's pretty much our landing page. If we look at it on a mobile device, so let's right click and inspect, we can hit mobile and we can see that it pretty much looks just as you'd expect. Looks pretty nifty if I say so myself. Now, obviously, we have to come back to this nav menu, but we will do that shortly. But first, we're actually going to move on to the next section, which is our product.svelte. So thus far inside of our product.svelte, we have our section wrapper, and that has an ID of product. Now, if we inspect this page, we would expect to actually see that section show up. So if we just come in here, well, actually, the first thing we have to do is come back into our page and actually render it out. So inside of here, we can render out product.svelte, making sure to import it. And now if we come back to our page, we can indeed see here we have our main, then we have our first section, and we have our second section. And we do indeed have the ID of project, so that's perfect. We can go ahead and close that again. Now inside of product, we're going to have some product cards, but we're also going to have some information. So up here, I'm going to say let product features equal to an array. We'll fill that out momentarily, but first we're going to enter this down onto a new line. And in here, we're going to create a div that has a class of flex, col, a gap of 10 until the small breakpoint, then we're going to have a gap of 14. And then on a medium breakpoint, we're going to have a gap of 24. We'll give it a flex of 1, item center, a justify center, and a padding bottom of 10 until the medium breakpoint, then we'll make it 14. Inside of here, we're going to have a div that has a class of flex column, a gap of 2, and this is going to contain a paragraph tag with a class of opacity 60% or just 60, a text size of base until we get to the small screen, that'll be a text large, and on a medium screen, a text extra large and text center. This is going to say start your lifetime. Then we'll have a span that has a class of text indigo 400, gym streak, and then after that we can have today. So if we come back, we can see that show up right there. And underneath this paragraph tag, we can have an H3, and this is going to have a class of text 4XL until the small screen, then text 5 extra large. Medium text 6 extra large, you get the idea. A max width of 1000 pixels using these square brackets for the custom value. An MX of order and a max, and a width of full, a font semi-bold, and a text of center. Now this one is going to say features for everyone. And once again, we can see that show up there. So that's kind of how we're moving on to the second page. And then underneath this div, we can create a new div that has a class of grid cols 1. That just means it's a singular column. Until we get to a medium screen, then we're going to say grid cols 2. We'll give it a gap of 10 until the medium, then we'll go for a gap of 14. And then on a large, we'll go for a gap of 20. Width full, max width 1100 pixels. Actually, I might not do the max width for the second. Let's just see how it looks. But we will give it a relative and a text size of base. And now in here, what we're going to do is we're going to have each product features as a product feature. We'll just do the singular version. And this is once again going to map over each product feature and have the card for it. Now we'll close that each block. And for this, we're actually going to define a component called the product card.svelte. And in here, we're going to open up a script tag and we're going to say export let index, just so we know what the index is. And in here, we're going to create a div that has a class of flex col, a gap of 8 until a medium screen, then we're going to have a gap of 10. And the other thing I'm actually going to do is copy this div right here and paste it inside this component because it's actually meant to wrap that bottom one. So I'm also going to paste the closing tag on the other side. So I'm just moving that whole div into this component. The other thing we're going to export let is the product features. Well, it's actually just the singular product feature, and we'll see how that will work in a minute. Now, the first thing we're going to have inside of here is an H4 tag. This is going to have a class of text 2XL until a small screen, then it's going to be a text 3XL, medium text 4XL, a max width of 1000 pixels, a width of full, a font medium, and a relative positioning. We're going to use some pseudo effects here, so we're going to say after and give it an absolute position, after top of full, after left of 0, after width of 1/5 of the parent element, after a height of 1.5, after a margin top of 1, after background slate 900, and after PR. Well, actually, sorry, that's the last one is just a general PR of 10, so padding right of 10. Inside of this H4, we're going to render out the slot text. and we'll see how that works shortly. After that, what we're going to do is have a paragraph, and this is going to say product feature, and we're going to access the description. And then underneath this div right here, well, actually, sorry, still within it, we're going to have a secondary div, and this is going to have a class of flex column, and a gap of 3. And in here, we're going to have a new each, and this is going to be product feature.feature list as list item. So we're just mapping over all of the feature lists. We'll see where this gets created shortly. And in here, we're going to have a div that has a class of flex, a gap of 2, and an items center. And then we're going to have a div that has a class of grid, place items center, a padding x of 1.5, text size of extra small until the small screen, then it's going to be a text of small. It's going to have an aspect of square, which means that the height will match the width. We're going to give it a rounded of full, so it'll be circular. A border of 1.5 pixels, so that's a custom amount, so we use these square brackets. A background of white, a border solid, and a border of green 300. We're doing all of that so that inside we can have an icon, so that's going to have a class of FA solid, FA bolt, and a text of green 400. Underneath this div just here, we can have a paragraph that has the list item. Now, obviously, that's not going to show up for the second, but if we come back into our product feature, we can go ahead and render out the product card, ensuring that we do, in fact, have the opening and closing product card features. In here, we're going to pass in the product feature equals product feature. So we'll pass that down as a prop. We're also going to pass down the index, which we can just access by adding a comma here and just access that index. Now you'll see just here we have the shorthand for passing props. That's absolutely fine. That works too. And in here we're going to have an if statement. So we're going to say pound if. And in here we're going to add a semicolon and an else if. And then we're going to have another else block. And we'll see what we do with that in a second. Well, actually, we can just add it now. This one's going to be if index is equal to 0, else if index is equal to 1, and then else. So we just need 3 conditions because we're going to have 3 product features. Now for our product features, we're going to come to this array and create 3 objects. Now the object template is going to have a, let's see what we access. So here we're going to have the feature list and a description and an image. So we're actually just going to have feature list, that's an array. Description is just going to be a text description. And then we're going to have an image URL that we use. For the feature list, once again, you'll want to copy this straight from the GitHub code. I'm just going to copy in the 3 features here. So here we can see them. Well, it's a list of 4, I guess you could say. And I'm just going to format them all simultaneously. So there's my first feature list. As for the description for the first one, it is just here. I'm going to paste it across. And then finally for the image URL, we'll come back to that momentarily. Now we can just duplicate this 3 times because we've got 3 of them. For the second one, I'll just copy in the new features. So here they are just here. Quickly format them so that they are all strings in the array. That's the second one. We'll swap out the description. Happy days. And then lucky last, this one just down here. So here's the description. And this one actually has 5 features. Actually, this one is not meant to be there. And so we can just go ahead and select all of these. We can have the quotation, then the comma, and just have that like there. So there are our 3 feature lists. Now back down here when we have the product card, for the first statement, I'm going to have some text. So this is going to get rendered as the slot inside of the card just here. And the reason I've done it like this is so that I can actually give it some neat formatting. So this first one's going to say, experience a beginner exercise. And then we're going to have the span with a class of text indigo 400 and a font of medium with the word master. And then we can just have class. For the second one, we are going to have lay the foundations for, and then same again, span, class, text, indigo, 400, font, medium, routine. And after that, we're going to have a break and then and consistency. And then finally, for the last one, we're going to say workouts specific to your then span, class, text, indigo, 400, font, medium, and then that can just say environment, and then we're going to have a secondary span, so we can just copy that first one, environment and expertise. And that's just going to check the index and render out the appropriate one as the slot component. So there we can see it actually showing up. It looks pretty decent. Obviously we're missing the images, but that will happen in a second. But on the whole, that looks pretty good. I might actually just get rid of this little break right here. I don't think that we need it. But we should include the space. So that's looking pretty nifty. For the images, we're going to come over to the static file and we're going to create a new folder called assets. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the images straight in. And once again, you can find these images in the GitHub, which is linked in the description down below. So I'm just going to copy them across. We have the 3 images. And so now in our little list, for the first one, we can just say assets slash, let's say, selection.png. The second one will be assets slash training.png, and the last one can be assets.goal. Assets./goal.png. Now we're not actually rendering out the image in the product card yet, so we have to come back to the product card component. And after this each just here, we're going to create a div that has a class of flex, item center, and that should actually be fine. And in here, we're just going to have a button that has a class of special button dark. We're going to give it an ML of auto. Actually, I lie. I think that's meant to be an MR of auto, so margin right of auto. A font of semi-bold. And inside of this button, we're going to have a paragraph that just says, try free today. And then we have the ampersand right arrow. So we can see that button show up for each of them. We're also just going to come up to this div right here, this top one, or the second top one, I guess. And we're just going to select that class and make it dynamic. So we're going to say plus index remainder 2 is equal to 1. So that means that it's an odd value. If it's odd, we're just going to set the order to 2. And that should set it to the other side when we add in the image div. So the second to bottom div, we're going to come under here and we're going to create a new div. This one's pretty nifty because it's going to create an application looking feel. So this one's going to have a flex col drop shadow overflow of hidden, a rounded bottom of large, and a medium. Actually, this is the one right here. So this is just going to wrap this one in parentheses and just add this check down here. So we're going to copy that check just out of the top one and instead paste it into this div just here. And we're actually going to say if the order is equal to, yeah, if it's odd, then the order is 1. That's absolutely fine. So now we can go ahead and create that div. We're also just going to have to create this drop shadow class. So we're going to come back into our app.css and use the period and then the class selector. And then in here, we're just going to have a filter. It's going to have a drop shadow, and that's going to be minus 10.8923 pixels, then a 14.523 pixels, and then a 35.0973 pixels, and then an RGBA of 29, 140, 242, and then a 0.2. So with that done, we can come back into our product card. Here we have this div right here. Inside of it, we're going to create a div which is going to pretend to be the action bar at the top, and that's just going to have a class of rounded top extra large, a height of 8 until we get on a small screen. Then we're going to have a height of 10, a background of white, an opacity of 60, a padding X of 3, and then we're going to say flex items center and a gap of 2. And in here, we're once again going to use the each. We're going to create an array that just has 3 indexes, and we can just call this I. And in here, we're going to have a div that has a class of rounded full. It's just going to be a circle, so we're going to say aspect square, a width of 2.5 until we get to a small screen, then it's going to be a width of 3. And it's going to have a background of indigo at 300. This can just be a self-closing div. If we look, that creates this little bar up here that just looks pretty nifty. And then underneath this div, we can have a secondary div that has a class of flex col, a background of white, a gap of 4, and a flex of 1. And this can have an image that has a source of a dynamic source. So we use the curly braces. This is going to be product feature.image URL. It can have an alt equal to product image, just like that. And we can go ahead and close that image. And so now the image shows up in our application next to each one. Looks like the order is not swapping, so something is being a little bit mischievous with the order. And so perhaps what we just quickly try doing is, it's because I've got the 2 pluses, I think is the problem. And I'm actually just going to try pasting it back up on our original div just up here, and instead set the order to 2. And that looks like it's worked for us. So now we can just see we have like an alternating product description. So here we have the first one, then it swaps over to the other way around, and then finally it swaps back. On top of this div that has the information, I might just add a padding top of 8, and then on a small, we'll just add a padding top of 10. And what that's going to do is just push it down so it looks like this just sits slightly higher than the rest, which is pretty cool. And obviously, if we come down to this screen size, it looks pretty good. The one thing I'm just going to do is make this a medium screen and above only effect, because we don't really want it swapping on a mobile layout. But otherwise, that looks super cool. That looks very clean. So we can kind of just scroll through all of them, which is really nice. And we've got all the images. So with that done, it's time to move on to the next section, and that is going to be the reviews section. So as always, we're going to have our section wrapper, open that up. And in here, we're going to have a div of class flex col, gap of 10, small gap of 14, medium gap of 24, a padding Y of 20, a flex 1, item center, and a justify center. Inside of here, we're going to have another div that has a class of flex col, and a gap of 2. And up the top, we can have our paragraph similar to the last one. This is going to have a class of opacity 60, text base until the small screen, then it's going to be text large, and then on a medium screen, we're going for a text extra large and a text center. And in here, we can say, don't just take our word for it. And then underneath that, we can have the H3. This has a class of text 4XL small, text 5 extra large, medium, text 6 extra large, a max width of 1000 pixels, an MX of auto, a width of full, and a font semi-bold, and a text center. And in here we can say, see what then have the span, the classic span with a class of text indigo 400. And then we can just say others. And then we can finish it off by saying have to say. And I believe that should be exactly the same as what we did in this component just here. It is indeed. Perfect. So if we keep scrolling, we see nothing, and that's because we have to bring in the component just in here, reviews, import that. And you can really start to appreciate how tidy the main component is looking at the moment. So here we have it. Don't just take our word for it, see what others have to say. Now in this component, the other thing I'm going to need in this reviews component is some actual reviews. So I had Google Bard generate a whole bunch of them, and I'm just going to copy them in here. I'm going to say reviews list is equal to, and I would just go ahead and once again copy these straight from the GitHub. So here's all the reviews. They have name, review, and then some features. The other thing we're just going to have to define up the top, just up here is equal. We're going to say let lim equal to true. We'll see what that is for in a second, but that's just a variable that we need to define, or essentially some state, I guess. Now coming back down inside of our list, underneath the h3 and the div here, we're going to create a new div. This is going to have a class of flex col until a medium screen. Then we're going to have a flex of row, a gap of 8, a width of fit, and an mx of auto. And here we're going to have a div with a class of flex col. We're going to match the gap of 8. And we're going to have an each that just says each. And then we're going to have a conditional statement. So it's going to say check if limit is true. If we are limiting, then we're just going to say reviews list dot slice between 0 and 4. So we're going to take the first 4 elements. Otherwise, we're just going to take the whole list, and we're just going to say as review item. And inside of here, we're just going to create a new file. It's going to be reviewcard.svelte. And the review card is going to have a little bit going on inside. So we're going to have a script. It's going to have export let, and we're going to need to import the review item. So we can just export let the review item just here. And this is going to have a div with a class of flex. It's actually going to be dynamic. So first we're just going to wrap it in the curly braces. It's going to be flex col, a gap of 2, a width full, a max width of 500 pixels, custom amount, so the square parentheses, and then an mx of auto and a position of relative. Now, as for the part that we're going to add on, which is the conditional, ensuring that we have that little space at the end of our string, this one's going to be slightly complicated. So the first conditional is we're going to check if left exists. So we're going to need to export let left. And left just checks if it's on the left-hand side of the 2 columns. If that's true, we're then going to check if the index remainder 2 is equal to 1, which means that it's odd. And if that is true, then we're going to add the class of hidden until a medium screen. Then we're going to give it a display of flex, an opacity of 0, a pointer events none, and a max height of 40 pixels. So it's a custom amount, so we use the square parentheses. And finally, an overflow of hidden. If not, we're going to have an empty string just there. And then if not to the bigger condition, we're then going to check if the index remainder 2 equals to 0. If it does, we're going to give it the class of hidden, medium flex, opacity 0, pointer events none, a max height of 40 pixels, and an overflow of hidden. And we'll see what this does more in a second. And then we're just going to have otherwise nothing. So that's a pretty complicated little class. We're also going to just need to export let the index value. But that's going to be the class just there. inside of this div, we can have a new div. This has a class of flex and a position of relative. That's pretty easy. And then we have another div inside of here. This one has a dynamic class as well, so we use the curly parentheses. This one's going to have a position of absolute, rounded full, a background of white, an aspect of square. It's going to be hidden until we get to a medium display, then it's going to be a grid. We're going to place items center. It's going to have a height of 4 and a top of 0. And then what we're going to add is a plus. And then we're just going to check if the index remainder 2 is equal to 0. And if it is, we can give it a right positioning of 0, a negative margin right of 8, a translate x of half, and otherwise we can give it a left of 0, a minus ml of 8, and a translate x half, but this one needs to be a negative translate x half. So it goes in the other direction. Inside of here, we can go ahead and add another div. This is just going to have a class of rounded full, a background of slate 950, an aspect of square, a BG slate 950, and a height of 2. And this is going to create a small circle in the middle, basically. After that div, but within the flex relative div, we're going to have another div, and this is going to have a class of flex and items of center and a gap of 2. And this one is just going to have an icon with a class of FA solid, FA user, and then we can go ahead and close that icon. And after that, we're going to have an H3. This one has a class of text large, a small text. On the small breakpoint, a text of extra large, and the medium, a text of 2 extra large. Inside of here, we can just render out the review item dot name, which is one of the parameters. And then after these two divs, we can have a second div. This has a class of height of 1.5 pixels, a BG of slate 950, a width of 1/4, a margin right of auto, a margin bottom of 4, and a margin top of 2. That one doesn't contain anything, but after that we can have a class of another div with a class of flex item center, flex wrap, a gap of 2, a text extra small. Until we get to the small screen, then it's going to be a text of small and a margin bottom of 4. And in here, we're just going to use the each block to map over the review item dot features. Is that what it's called? Review item dot features. Let's just check. Yeah, it is features. Perfect. And we can just say keyword. And inside of here, we can have a div that has a class of padding 1, but a padding y of 0.5. A rounded medium, we're going to give it a border, border solid, border indigo 400, a background of indigo 50, and a text of indigo 400. And in here we can just have a paragraph that contains the keyword. So if we save that, nothing is still showing up. We could actually go ahead and just import the review card, and we can go ahead and paste or pass down the review item prop, just like that, and then that can be a self-closing tag. If we just come back into the review card real quick, we'll just finish that up. Underneath this one, we just have a paragraph, and this has the review item dot review, which is going to be the actual review. So that's this element done. And now what we're going to do is inside of this thing here, we're going to duplicate this. So we've got 2 instances of them. In the middle, we're going to create a div that has a class of width, a custom width of 1 pixel, a background of slate 950, and a hidden until we get to a medium. Then it's going to have a display of flex. And in this top one, what we're going to do is we're just going to pass down left equals to true. And we're also going to pass down the index into all of them. So for both these ones just here, we're going to take the index and make sure that that gets passed down. but only the first lot of review cards actually has the left equals true. And that's going to create this effect. So this one just here is the line in the middle. The reason we do 2 lots is so that on a small screen we can have them one at a time and they all don't get displayed. However, on the big screen it just splits them into 2 columns. We have the little benefits that they experience. And then at the very bottom of this element we're going to have a button. Just here, this is going to have an on-click event of, it's going to set lim equal to not lim. So it's just going to inverse that parameter. And this is going to have a class equal to special button. And inside of this button, we're going to have a paragraph tag. So there's our paragraph. It's going to have a conditional. So we're going to check if lim is true. If it is, we're going to say show more. Otherwise, we're going to show less. Just like that. And so now at the bottom, we get this little button that if we click show more, it just shows more reviews. And if we hit show less, it just removes them. So that looks pretty nifty. Finally, after the button, we're going to have another div. This is going to have a class of flex, flex col, and a gap of 10. At the top, we're going to have a paragraph that has a class of mx auto, text large, small text extra large, medium text 2XL, and a font of semi-bold. And in here, we're just going to say trusted by 1349 Swolgers. And then underneath this, we're going back to the header and we're just going to copy this. Well, actually, why don't we just create a component for it at this point? Stars.svelte, where stars.svelte is just going to have the review component that has all of the cool stuff. So we can just go ahead and copy that into stars.svelte. That actually shouldn't be a component, so I'm just going to delete that. Sorry, it shouldn't be a folder, it should be a file, stars.svelte. We're going to paste that in there, and then we can render that inside of our hero section as well as at the bottom of our reviews, just underneath the paragraph right here. Stars. Make sure that's imported up the top. And now we have trusted by the Swolgers and the number of reviews down the bottom. Looking good. Now with that section done, we move on to the next one. The next one is frequently asked questions. This one's pretty straightforward. As always, the first thing we do is come into our page.svelte and just render it out, FAQs. And then what we can do is come into reviews, for example, and just copy this first stuff right here. So just everything until the H3 pretty much. And we can come into FAQs and just paste that in, ensuring that we import the section wrapper. And then we can just go ahead and close everything. So that's going to import that, and then we can just change the text. So the text here is going to say, for all your questions, qualms, and queries. And then the big text is just going to replace all of this, and it's just going to say frequently asked questions. And then under the div right here, we're just going to create another div. This has a class of flex, flex col, a gap of 8 until we get to a small, then a gap of 10, a medium, a gap of 14, and a width of full. And in here, we're going to have another each block. And this is just going to take the facts as an individual FAQ. We're actually going to need the FAQs up here. That's just going to be a list. I'm going to go ahead and once again copy in the frequently asked questions. These are just randomly generated by Google Bard as well. You can copy them from the GitHub, but it's just a question and an answer, basically. And inside of here, what we can do is have a div. This has a class of flex, a flex col, a gap of 2, text left, a max width of 800 pixels, custom amount, a width of full, an mx of auto, and a position of relative. Just underneath this div, we're going to have another one. This has a class of absolute, a top of 0, a left of 0, a width of a third, a height of 1 pixel, a background of slate 950, and a minus translate x of 4. We're going to duplicate this element, except this one is going to have a height of 2/3. So we can go ahead and swap the width for a height, change the 1 to a 2, and then just have a width of 1 pixel and a minus translate y of 4. That's just going to create a neat little effect. Underneath this div, we can have an h4. This can have a class of text large until small, then a text extra large, medium text 2XL, and a padding top of 2. And in here, we can just take the FAQ.question. And then under that, we can have a paragraph that has a class of padding left of 2. And this can just have FAQ.answer. The answer is actually just ANS, so that's going to change that. And it looks like I'm missing a padding, so inside of here, we're just going to have a padding of 4. And a padding X of 6. And that's just going to give us this frequently asked questions display with this neat little top hand border effect. And once again, if we come onto a mobile device, that's still looking pretty nifty just down on the side. So with that element done, we don't have far to go. The next one is going to be our conversion. Now this one's just going to have a custom section, so it's going to have a class of padding y 14 until we get to a medium, then it's going to have a padding y of 20, a flex column, a gap of 8, a background of hash 181B34, close that square parentheses because that's the custom amount, a text of white, text center, item center, and justify center, lots of centers. And here we can have an h4. This is going to have a class of text extra large, small text 2XL, medium text 3XL, and a font of Poppins. This is going to say reach your fitness. Then we'll have a span with a class of Poppins and font bold. And this can just say goals and aspirations. Underneath the H4, we can have a secondary paragraph. This also has a class of Poppins, a text base until a small, then a text large, and a medium text extra large. And this is just going to have a special star Unicode that you can get in the GitHub. And then we're just going to say unlimited time on free plan. And then we're just going to have another one of those stars. Finally, under there, we're going to have the call to action. So we'll just import that up the top. And we're going to pass in a dark equals true parameter, which if we come into our call to actions, we have to export let dark. We prepared to have this earlier. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add a custom styling to this top button right here. So we can just wrap special button in the curly parentheses and then add on a dark, check if that's true. If it is, we have a background of hash 181B34, and otherwise we don't change anything. So that's going to be the conversion. Now we just have to add that in here, so we can add in conversion, and obviously we have to save this component. And that's just going to bring up this little conversion element right here where we've got our call to actions. And then finally underneath that we can have our footer component. This one's relatively straightforward and is going to get rendered out inside of the layout.svelte, which it already is. And this one's just going to have a footer that's going to have a class of padding y at 16, small padding y of 20, medium padding y of 24, a px of 4 until we get to a medium, then we're going to have a px of 8. In here we'll have a div that has a class of max width 1200 pixels, custom amount, square braces, you know the deal. an mx of order, a width of full, a display of grid cols 1 until we hit a small screen. Then we're going to go grid cols 2. On a medium, we'll go grid cols 5. We'll have a gap of 8 and a text size of base. In here, we're going to have another division. This will have a class of flex column, a gap of 4, and on a medium screen, we'll say col span 2. This is going to have an h1 with a class of font semi-bold. This is going to be the name once again. So we can just go ahead and copy that from the header, swoly moly, just like we have here. Paste that bad boy in there. And then underneath that we're going to have a copyright symbol 2023. And then we're just going to say swoly moly as if it's the business name, LTD, all rights reserved. Now after that division, we're going to have another one that's going to have a div of class flex col, a gap of 4. Up the top here, we're going to have a paragraph with a class of font bold, Poppins, text base until a small, then it's going to be a text large. This one's going to say support. And then underneath that, we're going to have an anchor tag that has an href, a target of underscore blank, and it's going to have a class of cursor, pointer, hover, text, indigo 400, and a duration of 200. And in here, we're just going to say contact us. Pretty straightforward, and that's just going to have a link to whatever contact us section is appropriate for you. With that one done, we're just going to copy this entire div. After that, we're going to have another one. This one's going to say research, and then we'll just say read the science behind the training or whatever it is. We'll have another one underneath that that's going to say follow us. Oh, there's a spelling mistake just there. Research. This one's going to say follow us. And in here we could say Instagram. And just above that we could add in an icon. This is going to have a class of FA brands, FA Instagram, and a padding right of 2. We can go ahead and close that. That should bring up the Instagram link. You just want to add in the Instagram link right there. And then we can just duplicate this anchor tag a couple of times. So you could have a YouTube. You just want to swap out the brand icon. We could have a Facebook. And once again, swap out the Facebook. And lastly, you could do a Twitter. And now if we save that, we get this neat little footer down the bottom, which looks pretty cash money if I do say so myself. It's got all our links, read the science, and it looks like I've spelled indigo wrong on pretty much every single one of them. Because ideally, if we hovered over it, we would want it to change color to the indigo. So now if we hover over it, we can see that it does in fact turn indigo. And if we jump down to the mobile device screen, it works perfectly well too and looks nice and neat. So that's cash money. So we're almost there now. There's just a few more things we have to change. The first thing is in our section wrappers, for a lot of them, we haven't yet added the ID like we were supposed to. So up here we have an ID of project. In reviews, let's actually just go to the header. So where we have our nav links, reviews is going to take us to reviews and FAQs is going to take us to FAQs. So in each of them, we're just going to come up to the section wrapper and add in the ID equal to reviews. Copy that whole thing. Likewise in the FAQs, we can add that to the section wrapper, FAQs. And what we would expect to do is when we hit reviews, it slowly scrolls us down to the reviews. The product one is not working. Header, product, let's just check product, project, that's my issue. So that scrolls us down to the product, which is pretty nifty. FAQs takes us down to the FAQs. The next thing we just want to work on is the menu. Currently that does absolutely nothing, which is not so hot flash. But actually first we're going to come into the layout real quick and just do some pretty clever stuff in here. So the first thing we're going to do is underneath the footer, we're going to have a svelte tag that checks for the window, and it's going to bind scroll Y equal to a variable called Y, and it's also going to bind outer height. Now we have to make sure that we self-close this component just here, and up inside of the script we can go and initialize Y. We can by default create a reactive statement that sets letter outer height equal to 0, and what we're going to do from within here is create a function that's just reroute taking an href, and we'll see what that does in a minute. The other thing we're going to do is create a store. Now store is for global state. It works absolutely brilliantly inside of SvelteKit. We're just going to create a new folder. It's going to be store. In here we're going to create a file called index.js. And the way that you create a global store in SvelteKit is we're going to import writable from the Svelte store. We're going to lowercase writable, and then we're just going to say export const open modal is equal to writable, and we're going to initialize it as false. So this is essentially our global state. Literally so easy. Inside of our script, we're going to import open modal from /store, just like so. And now what we can do is just above the slot right here, we can have a variable that says if, and we check the reactive value of the store state by using the $, and then we just have open modal. We can close that, and this is going to be our menu page that's just going to lay over our entire page should we need it. Inside of here, we're going to have a div that has a class of fixed, a top of 0, a left of 0, a width screen, height screen, a border bottom, a background of white, a Z of 50, flex, flex column, a gap of 8, a padding of 5, but a padding X of 8. Inside of that, we're going to have a div that has a class of flex, item, center, justify between, and that's going to have a gap of 4, a border bottom, and a padding bottom of 2. This is going to have our classic header logo, so we're just going to copy that H1 and come back into the plus layout.svelte, paste that in there, and then we're going to have a button that has a class of outline none, border none, and in here we're just going to use the close icon. So that's going to be an icon with a class of if a solid, if a X mark, and a text 2 extra large. So currently nothing happens because our modal doesn't open. If we come into the header element just here, we can create a function that opens our modal. So we can import open modal from /store. And now on this button right here, we can say on click, we can just create a function. It gets the reactive value of the open modal, and it just sets it equal to true. So what we would expect to see is when we click that, it basically opens our modal. It looks like the close isn't currently working. Let's go and investigate that. Open modal, and that's because we haven't assigned it. So on the X mark, we would just want to do the opposite. On click, it's going to set the reactive value of the open modal equal to false. So now we have a working menu system, which is super convenient. The other thing we want to do is just on a medium or larger screen, we want to set hidden on this element because if we have it open, for example, we want it to then close on the bigger screen. So after the button and the div, we're going to create a new div that has a class of flex, a flex col, and a gap of 4. In here, we're going to have a button with a class of border, none, outline, none, a padding of 2. It's going to have a group, a duration of 200, a cursor of pointer, and a text of left. This one is going to contain a paragraph that just says product, and this one's going to have a class of duration 200. And when the group gets hovered, we're going to give it a padding left of 2. What we're going to do in here is add an on click, and that's just going to be the, what's the function we defined up here? Reroute. It's going to pass in the href, and we can just pass in the href being product. And now we can go ahead and duplicate this button maybe 3 times. So the second one is reviews, and lastly we can have FAQs and FAQs. Underneath that, we're just going to render out the call to actions. So just make sure that that's imported up the top. And now we can kind of see this showing up just here. The other thing we want to do is increase some of these font sizes and just give this element here a flex of 1. That should push these to the bottom. And we're also going to wrap the call to actions inside of a div that has a class of flex col, items, center, justify, center. Just so that these elements are always centered here. You can kind of just see that there. Well, you can't on a medium screen, but yeah, they're just centered in the middle. And then in each of these elements right here, we can go ahead and give it a class of poppins, text 3XL, and a font semi-bold. And the other thing I'm actually going to do is come in here and just have an icon that has a class of FA solid, FA chevron dash right, and a text XL and a padding left of 4. And that can just be a self-closing icon. And so now we get a little menu that looks pretty decent. Open it up, and if we close it, it doesn't currently do anything, and that's because this function doesn't do anything. And in the function, we're simply going to set the open modal value to false, and we're going to say window.location.href is equal to the href that we receive. So now if I click it, it scrolls us down to the appropriate section. Now the last thing we need to do is obviously this menu goes away when we scroll. It looks nice on the first page, however we've got a sneaky solution that looks even cooler for the rest of our application. Underneath this open modal right here, we're going to have one more if block. This is just going to say if y is greater than outer height. So outer height is a variable that we defined earlier, just here. And essentially how outer height is going to work is that's just going to say if we've scrolled more than the original page height. So if we've left the header section behind, then we're going to have a div that has a class of background white, fixed top of 0, left of 0, a width of full, flex col, a Z of 20, a padding X of 4, and we're going to give it a class called fade in. And in here, we're going to render out the header element. Now we quickly just have to create the class fade in. It's pretty straightforward. We just say dot fade in, and this is going to have an animation called fade in. It's going to be 300 milliseconds. We'll give it an ease in, and we'll say forwards so that it sticks around. And in here we can just create a keyframes event called fade in, and that's just going to say from, and here we're going to give it an opacity 0, and we're going to say 2, and that's going to have an opacity of 1. And so now as we scroll down our page, our thing goes away until we should be hitting the page. I obviously haven't saved this. There you go, you see it show up. So no header, and then as we scroll, it shows up, and we always have our menu there to take us wherever we need to go. We've got our FAQs, we've got our contact section down the bottom. Honestly, it looks super nifty, super neat, great for conversion. We can see all the reviews, we can show more. Looks really nice and tidy in the middle of our page, and as we go on a bigger screen, we can see that we split the reviews into two sides. Our nav links work up the top. That's absolutely perfect. That routes us back to the home page. And you should be able to make absolute bank with this layout. And just like that, we have our absolutely filthy web application. And with that done, it is finally time to deploy our application. For that, we're going to come over to Netlify. Now you will need to log in or create an account if you don't already have one. Now, the other thing you'll just want to do is make sure that this code is uploaded to your GitHub to deploy it, because we're going to deploy it through GitHub. And we can do that by hitting Add New Site, and we're going to import an existing project. Now you're going to want to hit Deploy with GitHub. That will open up a GitHub authorization window, and then you'll be able to search through your repositories right here. If you don't yet have one, you can go ahead and configure the Netlify app on GitHub, and that will allow you to add that repository to have it deployed. Now that I have configured it so that it is visible, I can go ahead and search for the gym landing page. It should automatically detect what type of project it is, and we can go ahead and hit deploy. That's going to do its best attempt at deploying our project. We can see that the deploy is in progress. While that's deploying, we can just come into the domain management right here, and we can go ahead and edit the site name, and this can be Swoly Moly. We could probably just make it one word, and we can hit save on that, and that's just going to mean that the URL we can share with everyone is swolymoly.netlify.app. If we come back, we can see that it is fully deployed, so I should be able to paste that in up here. And just like that, we can see that our project is undeniably live. It looks absolutely brilliant, and it's going to convert. All the features and functionalities work perfectly. And congratulations, you now have an awesome landing page that you can use for absolutely anything and add to your portfolio. And with that, my friends, that is the whole tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, smash the like and subscribe buttons. I appreciate that support. And finally, go make some changes to it. Customize it, personalize it, add your own flair, change the product that's being advertised, and share it in the Discord. I would love to see what you guys come up with. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Learning to code? If so, be sure to check out the Small James web development roadmap. Link is in the description down below, or dive straight in with these videos.